Londra'daki Worli Mahalaxmi projesi için Kingston Üniversitesi mezunu ve 2007'den beri Foster & Partners'ın ortaklarından olan proje lideri Ricardo Mateu ile dünyanın birçok farklı ülkesinde çeşitli projede imzası bulunan aydınlatma tasarımcısı Peter Fordham'ı sahneye davet ediyorum.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to this second Light in Architecture lecture. I hope that we live up to your expectations and that we're as good as the guys were last year. We'll try our best. 20 minutes isn't a lot of time to explain anything in much detail, so I'll go quite quickly, and if there are any questions at the end, maybe we'll have some time for questions later. Before we focus the discussion on one project in particular, I would like to briefly go back and delve into recent history of the lighting of buildings in the public realm. I'd like to discuss how we approach lighting in our buildings in general before we focus on one project. And when I talk about lighting, I'm talking about natural light and artificial light, obviously. We architects love to show images of our buildings at night time, all lit up, but also daylight is a very important part of what we do at Foster & Partners. So passive and active lighting are both very key components. And I'd also like to look at the different approaches that we might take to lighting different types of building. Then we will look at the Worli Mahalaxmi project in detail, and Peter from DHA will also pick up on that discussion and go into much more detail on the project. So, the 20th century in architecture may well be remembered for the birth of the corporate headquarters and its ultimate vertical expression, which is the skyscraper. Foster & Partners are obviously one of the principal exponents of that building type, known for corporate headquarters design from the 1970s to the present day. This is one of the first corporate headquarters that was designed by the practice. It's the Willis Faber Dumas building in Ipswich, which is quite an ordinary looking building from the outside in daytime, but it's very interesting when the lights come on at night and you can see what's going on inside. I think the general public think a lot of modern architecture is quite cold and soulless, which is perhaps a bit unfair and a leftover, if you like, of the 1960s, when a lot of pretty grim architecture was built across Europe. And most recent architecture, perhaps, will also conjure up similar images in the mind of the general public, with a lot of glass and steel. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is, just with some fairly utilitarian lighting, you can create very interesting effects. Foster & Partners' international reputation was founded really with the design of the Hong Kong-Shanghai Bank in Hong Kong. And this was a very early sketch by Norman Foster of one of the key elements of this building. It's a very deep plan office building with an atrium inside, which was quite innovative for that time. And it also has a light scoop on the outside of the building to bounce sunlight into the heart of this very deep plan. And here you see the atrium, obviously in daytime, with a lot of office accommodation on either side of the atrium, but with plentiful daylight in that space brought in through the use of this light scoop. And back in the 1980s, when this building came up from New York to London to Hong Kong, it was quite vogue, quite in fashion to illuminate buildings all night long with giant searchlights. It was the ultimate expression of corporate success, if you like, to build a large iconic headquarters building and bathe it in light, perhaps not paying too much attention to the historic neighbours. I think this is perhaps a better example than some of the buildings of that era, but I think certainly we've moved on since then. This is a more recent building that was completed in Spain, in Madrid in Spain, not so long ago, and obviously we had fairly ambitious plans for lighting this building in the inception, and that slowly became a bit more toned down in this post-financial crisis world. We tend to think a lot more carefully about what we're doing with light. We're trying not to throw it up into the night sky, but actually to illuminate specific areas of the building. So this is the reception, obviously, where it is important to have a certain amount of light to draw people into the building. I think at a basic level, lighting is about creating spaces that we can navigate safely and efficiently. At a grander scale, it gives form and scale to our buildings. This slide is of particular interest because the building is by Foster & Partners, but the bridge is by Wilkinson Eyre, who will be speaking later this evening. This is a music centre in the north of England, and it's a more expressive building, if you like. I think there's more opportunity to engage with the public on a public building, a building that the public can enter, especially an event-type building such as this, where numerous concerts and the like happen on a daily basis, and the public comes in, and there is an opportunity to do these kind of lighting installations, which is quite different from the everyday work that we might do as an architectural practice. And taking that further with another cultural building, this is Dallas Opera House in Dallas in Texas. There are numerous opportunities here to create from the inside of the auditorium a delicate light sculpture to illuminating what is the auditorium and the fly tower externally, to have it as a magnet. This is a much more expressive building than the office building I've just shown you in terms of how to draw people to the building. And that is extended out obviously into the landscape also, which is an important part of the design. More and more of our work nowadays is focused in the hospitality sector and hotels and residential. And so with hotel work, often buildings are inward-looking. Hotel windows or views from a hotel come at a premium, and often not all of the rooms in a hotel have a view. So this was very much an inward-looking building where we're trying to do something interesting by illuminating the glass screens that become the bathrooms. And this is another new hotel that is just completing now in London. I spoke just a few moments ago about how natural daylight is important. Well, this again, although there are windows to the facade, they are quite limited from an internal perspective. But what is interesting about this building is the atrium at the heart of the building, which allows a very small but a very carefully considered bit of natural daylight into the center. This is a building of a much different scale. It's a single-family home in Japan, and here we see a kind of intimacy in terms of lighting that you don't really get on the larger corporate buildings. And this was a very carefully considered project, not only in terms of its architecture but also its light, with these amazing backlit stone walls, to give a kind of a much more of a warmth to the space than you would have in a corporate space. In terms of larger residential projects, as I said, this is more and more our bread and butter work these days. This is a project in Vancouver. That's the image, the visualization that was created early on, and this is the built reality. And this is a mixed-use project also, with some commercial office at the base next to a historic building, and then residential up above. And you'll see some similarities in the design of this building and the Worli Mahalaxmi Tower also. What is interesting to note is that whilst the commercial area is fairly evenly lit, obviously for the apartments it's a completely random lighting experience from the outside, because we can't control who's going to put their lights on and who's not. And this is perhaps a little bit unsatisfactory. As architects, we like to think of the base of the tower, the middle and the top, and how we might unify all of that in some outward expression. So, on to the main project, and Peter will go into more detail about the actual technical aspects of the lighting. But from its inception, Worli Mahalaxmi was a grand project in scale. It reaches over 300 meters in height, or will, and it makes it a very visible, gives a very visible impact on the skyline of Mumbai. The sales centre, which Peter will show you in a little while, I actually have some. The sales centre will have a 6-metre tall model of the towers, and this is the model in progress, which is also going to be lit up, hence all the wires everywhere. And this is a small mock-up taken from the tower, built at the same scale. This is a mock-up about this big, but the model will be 6 metres tall, the biggest model I've ever had built. It's all about a grand scale here. This was the first promotional image produced by the client, and it gave us some very strong clues as to what type of development they were looking for, but also, perhaps unknowingly, gave us some more subtle clues about how we might unify the towers with these vertical lines going up the facade. With all of our projects, we want to get into a local mindset and design a building or a group of buildings that is of its place. And the first principle of designing in India is to create according to Vastu, which dictates where the energy and the water may be situated to create harmony, wealth and well-being in your living space. And ultimately can dictate where the rooms go in the house. Now, this obviously is not so easy on when you have a project of 3 towers on a constrained site and have more than one apartment per floor. We're talking about multiples of apartments in some cases, from 3 or 4 apartments in the lower levels of the building to single duplex and triplex apartments at the top. These were some of our first ideas about how we might locate these things. The other, another major influencing factor for the design of the building was this idea of the courtyard or the Indian palace and shade. In India, shade is as important as light. There is obviously very strong daylight all day long, all through the year, so we have to be very careful about how we control that. And we do that primarily through the use of passive means, as in overhanging balconies. They're very deep balconies which create a lot of shade before you actually get inside each individual apartment. However, whilst the traditional Indian palace might be inward looking to a courtyard, these three towers are very much outward looking to the panoramic views of Mumbai, with the sea visible on all sides from the upper reaches of the tower. So our client was very specific and asked for balconies to every single living space and all around all three towers. We took the idea of the courtyard, or the heart space of the palace, and that became the living space of the apartment. In that way, you can come directly straight out of the lift and into the living space. These spaces are bathed with light in daytime, so we have a series of screens, etc., on the windows. There are also some very exuberant lobby spaces and amenity spaces. This is one of the typical lobbies, and we've been working very closely with Peter on the design of the water and light features. There are several different elements to this. Often we like the lighting to be discreet, for example in the wall here, and this one is, this central piece. This actually hides a very large column which is holding up the building, but we're trying to create a sense of spectacle and at the same time create a more pleasant microclimate within the building to have a cooling effect as you walk through the door, particularly during the, most of the year except for the monsoon. These are some of the other communal spaces where we may have backlit walls and some top-lit spaces with discrete lighting. This is one of the apartments at the top of the building, and you'll see some of those theatrical elements of lighting in the interior spaces also. We haven't designed all of the interiors of the apartments. We're mainly looking at the communal areas, but this is one of the images that I've borrowed from the interior designers for the purpose of this discussion. I briefly mentioned amenities. There's every possible facility you can imagine in this development, with a gym and spa and squash courts and all the kind of sports you can imagine. This is a spa located in the third tower towards the top, and obviously we need to look at very atmospheric lighting here, and we're working with very closely with both a spa designer and Peter and his team on some of these areas. Again, we have these sculptural elements to the ceiling. And this image is a very early sketch with this idea of the palace in the sky. So we take the traditional Indian palace idea and sort of elevate it in a vertical expression. And well, this is the result, really. What I mentioned earlier when I showed the other high-rise residential project in Vancouver, we spoke about the random nature of the lighting, and what we've been working at very hard with Peter is to try and unify those different elements of the tower. The tower sits on a 20-story podium of car parking, which Peter will go into in a little while. So there's this idea that perhaps we will have these vertical elements carrying up the full height of the tower, and then these halos of light or discs around the penthouses and the facilities at the top. So, working very closely with our lighting designers, we like to take a holistic approach to the entire building, looking at the grand scale as well as the detail of individual lobbies, departments, the landscape, the pools, etc., to try and create a sense of grandeur whilst avoiding the Christmas tree effect, if you like. I'm conscious of time and my time slot, so I think now would probably be a good time to hand over to Peter, who will go into quite a lot more detail about the project. Okay. How did I do for time?
I didn't check. Good evening. Good evening. I'm guessing that the majority of you here are probably more familiar with the work of Foster & Partners than DHA Designs. I'll try and change that a little bit in the next 20 minutes. My name is Peter Fordham, Director at DHA Designs, an independent lighting consultancy based in London. There are three parts to my presentation. The first is going to be a brief introduction to the company, followed by the story of how we ended up working on the Worli project with Ricardo and his team. We start with the sales centre, followed by the main project itself. When I first met Ricardo a year ago, he said to me, "Show me what you've got. Tell me about the projects that you've worked on in the past." And sort of naively, I said, "Well, we've got a mixture of mixed use, some interior projects, some museums, and some resorts and hotels." And a few hours later, he typed an email back to me saying, "Hotels, well, you guys lit the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas, which was one of our most well-known exterior lighting projects over the last 15 years. For us, the Bellagio was our third project in Vegas. This was completed in 1998. This followed the erupting volcano outside the Mirage Hotel and also the Buccaneer Bay pirate show outside the Treasure Island Hotel. So we're beginning to get quite a good relationship with our clients in Las Vegas. Now, in 1998, technology was quite different to that of today. But what we were doing was taking theatrical lighting styles and applying them to architecture. Now, the DH in DHA are the initials of the founder of the company, David Hersey. David has his background in theatrical lighting. In fact, in the 1980s, some of his shows you will have heard of include Cats, Starlight Express, Les Mis. Towards the end of the 1980s, David was then being asked to apply his theatrical lighting techniques to more in the realm of architecture, which is how we end up working on these projects in Las Vegas. Our scope also includes the architectural lighting of the Italian village around the lake, as I hear, all of which had to be coordinated with a magnificent fountain show. Now, following on from the Bellagio, again with the same developer, Steve Wynn, we moved to the other side of the world, to Macau, where we spent 6 years working with them on the three phases of their development of the Wynn Macau casinos. The image on the left is the first phase. Image on the right was completed in just last year, the third phase. But at this stage, our scope of work was beginning to change. We were also not just looking at the exterior lighting of these projects, but also now the interior. We worked very closely with an American-based interior designer, Hirsch Bedner Associates, to light all of the gaming areas, for example, the food and beverage outlets, even the guest suites and the Sky casinos. But we developed a relationship there that we stuck and maintained with after many years, and it's through that interior designer that we were introduced to the client in Mumbai, and ultimately how we began to work on the project for Worli. So aside from the resorts, cultural buildings, our portfolio includes, this is the House of Musical Arts in Oman that was completed earlier this year. I particularly like this example showing the layered approach to the facade lighting. You can see at ground level a soft wash onto the facade using in-ground uplights. As the facade steps back, we have a second layer of light, like tears on a cake. It's a very soft approach and very warm and very inviting. Our portfolio also includes interior work such as restaurants. This is the restaurant at the Royal Academy of Arts in London, completed a few years ago and a winner of a lighting design prize. The architect introduced a series of elliptical discs for acoustic properties, which from a lighting designer gave us a great opportunity to introduce lighting, cove lighting in different colours to create a daytime view and a nighttime appearance for cocktails or special occasions. And then lastly, our reputation in the UK, we're very well known for our work in museums and conservation, yet still we can maintain, even with the confines of a wall-mounted display case, we can still create contrast and visual interest. We have 1,700 objects on display in this gallery. This is the jewellery gallery at the Victoria and Albert Museum, designed by Eva Jurichner Architects. So we move on to the Worli project, and as I mentioned, our first introduction was through the sales centre. We had, over the last 10 years, worked on a number of marketing suites for different developers, property developers around the world. One I'm going to show you before we go into the actual Worli project. This is a show suite or centre of excellence for Lucent Technologies, completed in 2002. This is their European headquarters. Now, the ground floor entrance is quite corporate. The lighting has the ability to change colour during the time of day. So in the morning we use cool hues concealed in the ceiling coves and around the tops of the columns. We were using 3 colours of cold cathode concealed in these coves. But as the day progressed, the quality of the natural light that was falling through the external glazing changed, and so the artificial lighting could change as well, going to a warmer hue. But that's all very well on the corporate level, but the presentation suite down in the basement was rather different. You arrive at this suite in the basement of this building and you see in front of you a flattened sphere. The sphere is, can you remove that? The sphere consists of perforated aluminium panels which you can treat with light to work as a theatrical gauze. Depending where you place the light, you can make that mesh material look solid or partially transparent. Once you've arrived into this space, the walls of this flattened sphere open like segments of an orange. You walk into the space. The lighting is coming up from the floor beneath you. Around the perimeter of the perforated mesh, you see these screens. They're right up against the perforated material, so that from the inside you can view this audio-visual experience. The door then closes, the floor revolves, segments open, and you see an audio-visual show about the client's latest product. But at the end of the show, a table can rise up from the floor, and the space can then be used as in a presentation mode. So it's a completely multifunctional presentation space using lighting techniques that we've taken from the theatre, essentially. But what's interesting about this space is that it's a totally controlled artificial environment. Moving on to Mumbai now. The sales centre. Well, the site map indicates the position of the project here. The yellow is the sales centre building. It's about 90 metres long. The 3 towers sitting on the podium are shown here. And here's a satellite aerial view. It's an unusual looking building for a sales centre, so there were some challenges. We begin with a simple elevation. So you enter the sales centre here in this triple height space. It's 13 metres up to the roof, and then the long facade here is 8.5 metres. The section on the left-hand side indicates the model that Ricardo spoke about. This model really is huge. The entrance wall is a glass curtain wall, and you walk into the space and you see the model. The original designs also indicated a skylight at the top to introduce some natural light. In plan, the landscape designer introduced this avenue that you come along here, and you enter into the sales centre and this space. So this is the triple height space. This is the model, and you can walk around on this mezzanine area here before you can continue through some semi-private meeting spaces down towards the show flat. The show flat is a 5-bedroom apartment. This is a section of a typical floor plan on one of the residential towers. It sits on a pool of water in the sales pavilion that extends underneath the curtain wall cladding to the outside. This was Ricardo's team's early visual of the space, of the entrance space. So you walk into the space here, and the wow factor is this huge model with this fabulous image of the Mumbai skyline behind there. The client was very keen to introduce this mezzanine to allow people to walk up behind the model and the original design of the skylight. Now, one of our concerns was for this wow factor to really have its momentum, we need to really control this environment. The skylight was proving difficult for us as a lighting designer, as was the glass entrance wall, which faces east as well. So we certainly had some challenges ahead of us. I was on site in February this year, so you can see the stage of the construction. The image on the left indicates the lower corridor space. This is the main entrance area. And turning the other way, this is the area where the show flat is going to be built. The image on the left here is where the huge model is going to sit, with this curved wall in the background. And then if you turn to the right, here, this is the avenue that you walk down towards the show flat. So, when it came to presenting our concepts, this was our daytime view. You can see we had persuaded Ricardo that we can block up the skylight here so we can create a much more artificial space that we can control more easily, limiting the amount of daylight in this space, introducing sheer drapes on the glass curtain wall as well. The model is also, as Ricardo said, internally lit, so the visitor can, by using an iPad or tablet, select a lighting scene which will reveal their particular flat, for example. But the image on the back wall here is the wow factor too. It's a backdrop against the model, and our lighting wants to really play this to its maximum capacity. So what we were introducing was around this perimeter cove, around here in this ceiling area, a high output linear RGB source so that we can control. In the upper part of the ceiling here, this is where we have a number of AV projectors projecting onto this curved wall, and also some color changing floodlights as well. So we can create this transition through light from a daytime to a nighttime image. So from sunset coming into the twilight night sky. And then we have this final transition, you can see, controlling the environment here to the nighttime image. If we're moving on to the main project then, the last part of my presentation, our scope now includes the exterior lighting of the project, the landscape lighting, and the front of house interior lighting of the public spaces, the amenity floors. So where do we start with the exterior lighting on a building of this size? It really is going to become iconic on the Mumbai skyline. Ricardo's mentioned some of the strategy that we're taking for the facade. We're going to try to link the top of the tower to the bottom in some way using light. You can see here, this is the podium car park area, equally with an interesting cladding that we need to treat. So, 25 years ago, you'd light this building quite differently, or you'd treat what we used to say the bucket of light approach. You throw a bucket of light at a building and you hope some sticks. Those days are long gone. What we're trying to do now is incorporate the lighting within the actual architecture, within the cladding itself. Also, this being a residential tower, you need to be much more mindful of the user as well. So the lighting that we're proposing will have no effect to the users when they're actually in their apartments. They won't be able to see that at night. So we propose these vertical lines of light going from the ground level all the way up to the top. We've done this before. We did this in Dubai in 1998. This is the Emirates Towers, where we included cold cathode lighting in these fins, these horizontal fins on the edge of these two towers. We used a mixture of a cool white and a turquoise, and the effect is quite stunning. Even 15 years later, against the ever-changing Dubai skyline, it still has quite an impact for a very little amount of light. On a European scale, there are two projects that we use as examples. The project on the right is a residential tower project in London, where we have a vertical line of light wrapping around the top of the tower. This was lit by Morris Brill Lighting Design a few years ago, and a corporate headquarters on the left in Frankfurt with a single line. And in plan form, these are where the locations of the vertical lines of light on each of the three towers. This is the technology. The product here I particularly like. It's made by a company called Insta from Germany. It has a very robust stainless steel housing and a very good diffuser across the front. The stainless steel housing is ideal here. The LED unit itself is almost quite independent from daytime thermal expansion that could affect the luminaire directly. Now at the top, for the amenity floors, this sort of stacked architecture here, we would like to continue our line of light by just accentuating the shape, the top and bottom. It's like a sandwich almost that we're creating here using light. The same fixture can be used in a faceted form to work its way around the curves. And you can see here, so it's just the top and the bottom here creating this visual strong line of a white light. In plan form, the extent. And then we go down to the bottom, the car park itself, where we want to consider also how the building is perceived at a more human scale as you're driving through towards this building. The appearance of the building at the top with the rings and the vertical lines of light is going to be seen from quite a distance, but we've also got to consider the appearance as you get closer to the building. The cladding that we have to work with has a bullnose detail at every level, interspersed with darker aluminium louvers. We're proposing to conceal small sources in the tops of each of the bullnose to light the underside of the bullnose above. Now with LED technology and the quality of the lenses, we can use a 10 by 60 degree lens on a very small luminaire to get a very wide and narrow fan of light that can achieve this. As the extent of the proposal for the car park cladding, shown in yellow, potentially to be extended around to the two sides. So taking all of this together, we've come up with a few renders. Where you can see we've suggested introducing a change of color temperature, which of course we can easily achieve now with the LED sources. So this is a change from a cool white light around the base of the podium, going to a much warmer hue, almost as warm as 2700 Kelvin, which complements the interior amenity spaces. As Ricardo had mentioned, we can do nothing about controlling the internal lighting of these the residents themselves in terms of their lounges, etc. But we can make quite a strong identity of the building by introducing these vertical lines of light. LED technology, of course, allows us to introduce colour, if that's appropriate, quite subtly done, perhaps just for special occasions, Diwali, for example, going from a cyan to a rich blue over a very soft colour change. Our scope includes the landscape lighting on the podium. We've suggested some ideas for illuminating the pool areas and the seating areas. This is a landscaped area that's shared between the three residential towers. We've suggested an edge lighting treatment around the edge of the pools. That would allow us to do something quite interesting on the base of the pools, either through projection or through small fibre optic points of light, creating a geometric pattern in the base of the pool, which can be seen from above in the upper towers. And finally, on the landscape lighting on the podium, the landscape consultant has introduced a series of landscape islands with a seating area around each one, which we'd like to express with light using a linear source around the base of each of the seats. I'll show you a couple of examples where this has been achieved very successfully. Here's the piece of kit. It's a very robust piece of kit. It's a stainless steel channel with an excellent LED source that is totally encapsulated and diffused. So you get a very soft line of white light without seeing the individual dots of the luminaires. Moving on lastly to the interior spaces, I just use this as an example due to limited time. This was the lobby of Tower 2, an older version to the one that Ricardo showed you. Working up the scheme with Foster's office, we have a transition here so that we can concentrate light on the feature wall. This is the core wall. This is always going to be a visual feature into all of the lobby spaces of the three towers, simply backlit, so you just have a little strip of light that's visible here. But your eye is really drawn to this sculptural feature in the center, and of course the lighting around to the column itself. For the sculptural feature here, we took inspiration from this fabulous installation of the O2 Media Cloud in Frankfurt a few years ago. This consists of 28,000 acrylic rods. Each of the rods has an LED pixel at the back of it, which edge lights the rods, and you can then control the intensity and the color of each of the acrylic tubes. So we'd like to apply that type of science perhaps to the more sculptural areas in that lobby as an example. The importance of the big feature light we show as an example here at the lobby of the W Hotel in Doha, which is a beautiful chandelier. Very simple lighting technology, but the quantity and the cluster really makes this space quite remarkable. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to summarize them with these 3 points. DHA Designs, we have 24 years of experience now, formed in 1988, lighting projects across the world, and we hope that the Worli project is going to be as successful too over the next few years, working with Ricardo and the team at Foster's. The sales centre has allowed us the introduction into the project through a long route via an interior designer we work with on one of our projects in Macau, coming full circle. It allows us to use theatrical lighting techniques with a stunning interior design as well. The main project is going to become a landmark project in Mumbai, there's no question about that. It's an emerging market, it's the first project for us in India, so it's extremely exciting. And it is going to be a blend of world-class architecture with lighting design. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter and Ricardo. If there are any, we might have a few minutes of question and answer session. Birkaç dakika soru cevap bölümü yapabiliriz aslında. Sorusu olan ilgilerimiz var mı? Kendinizi de tanıtırsanız sorunuzdan önce.
Efendim ben Yaşar Marulyalı, Mimarlık Vakfı Başkanlığı yapıyorum. Ben mimar kardeşimizi ve aydınlatma tasarımcısı arkadaşımızı takdir ediyorum ve kutluyorum. Çünkü çok güzel sunumlar yaptılar ve beraber çalışmalarının gayet güzel ürünlerini bize takdim ettiler. Gerçekten bir mimari şölen yaşadık diyebilirim bu akşam için. Uzun süredir beraber çalışan arkadaşlarımız, şu soruyu yöneltmek istiyorum ben. Mimari tasarım ve aydınlatma tasarımı muhakkak paralel çalışmalarınız olmuştur. Hangi noktadan itibaren bu çalışmaları beraberce yürüttünüz? Tecrübelerinize dayanarak en faydalı sonuçların, en etkili sonuçların elde edilmesinde nasıl bir çalışma oldu ve hangi projenin hangi etabında beraber bu çalışmalara başladınız?
Did you get that? Yes, I did. Thank you very much for your question. For us at Foster & Partners, the collaborative process is always very important with our engineers, our environmental engineers, our structural engineers, environmental engineers, our MEP guys, and of course our lighting designers. And I think the earlier on in the process that we can all get around the table, the better the result, always. Now there is a peculiar habit in India of appointing consultants very late in the project, unfortunately. So in a sense, Foster & Partners started the design of this development and got to quite an advanced stage before Peter came on board, before even we had structural engineers, if you can believe that. And that poses a certain number of issues for us. It's not the ideal scenario, and we would have wanted it to be another way. However, I think with given the scale of this project and the multiple opportunities for incorporating lighting into the design, there was a lot of opportunity at every stage of the project to bring in that expertise and those ideas at every stage of the project. And of course we're still developing them now, and we will go on developing them as the project starts to rise out of the ground through value engineering exercises and through finalizing what fittings we're actually going to use. Often is the case in my studio, we have design reviews continually throughout the process, even when the building's going up, and often designs can change at a very late stage.
I think the success also is you keep up the coordination. Our offices aren't too far away. We're in the same city, which helps an awful lot as well. Regular design reviews and design meetings as details develop. But as I mentioned from my presentation, the project was at quite an advanced stage when we were introduced to the project, originally just for the sales centre. My site photographs showed that in February this year, the structure was up, etc. But we could still make changes to enhance the design. And now that we're working almost a stage behind in a catch-up phase, there's a lot of work for us to do, but the success of this is just the continuous coordination. The earlier the better, really, in terms of our appointment on any project, and clients are beginning to become more and more aware of that.
I'd just like to add, we fought hard for DHA to come on board for the main project because we very much like their background in theatrical lighting. It wasn't just a case of opening a catalogue and sprinkling a few fittings on the building. We all the time since the beginning of the project, we had in our mind this idea that we wanted to unify the base and the podium, the tower and the tops of the towers in some way, and I think we found a very good fit between architect and lighting designer in this particular design, and hopefully we'll do a lot more projects together.
Bir son soru alabiliriz. May I request you to choose one because there are a few. Who would you like?
Oh,
This is the first one I saw, sorry.
Merhabalar, ben Mateu Güngör, Etü Mimarlık Fakültesi Mimar Tasarımda Bilişim öğrencisiyim. Yüksek lisans öğrencisi. Size bir soru sormak istiyorum. Dış mekanlarda kullanılmış olan bu aydınlatmalar, residential yani konutlardaki iç mekanları nasıl etkiliyor gece? Yani bunların gerçekten hani bir insan orada uyuyorken bu etkileniyor mu, yoksa sadece dışarıda var olan bir aydınlatma mı? Bu konu hakkında bilgi alabilir miyim acaba? Teşekkür ederim.
Shall I start?
yeah.
We had a direction quite early on from the client in terms of the landscape and all of the amenities that they wanted, all of the functions that they wanted to include in that space. And one of those directives was to try and carry the landscape into the building. And we very much like that idea, this idea that the glass wall doesn't create a barrier, but it creates a sort of inside-outside space. And really, there should always be a continuation of that in the lighting and how we're dealing with the lighting in those various spaces. You saw some images earlier of the reception, one of the reception areas of the towers. They're all distinct, but they all have water. They all have garden areas. So in a sense, we're trying to bring some of that outside world in. Plants grow incredibly well in India, in Mumbai particularly. It's a very hot, humid environment. And so there are multiple opportunities really to illuminate them.
But also, as we mentioned in my presentation, we're very aware in a residential tower that anything we do to the facade should not disrupt the experience from the people inside the apartment, which is why we're very careful to consider positions of fixtures within the cladding itself that cannot be seen from when you're standing inside. This is for the vertical lines of light, for example, that I suggested. So we keep that to an absolute minimum now, and the architecture allows us to do that by working on the project with Foster and Partners at this stage. If, for an example, we had been appointed much later and the cladding package had already been concluded, it would be far more difficult to introduce that type of technology into the facade. So it comes back to the first question: the sooner the lighting consultant is appointed on the project, the better the result.
At the same time, if you're a resident in one of the towers and you're not on the podium, if you're in your apartment, you won't perceive that vertical light or that cylindrical light, as Peter said, but you will, looking down, get a sense of the theatre from the lighting designs that we have for the pools and the landscape areas, which are quite extensive between the three towers.
Well, thank you. I think because we have a limited time,
Sure.
there will be a cocktail at the end, so I believe there will be lots of questions who will be coming to you face to face.
Thank you.
Peter, çok teşekkürler. Peter, Fordham ve Ricardo